Welcome, everyone. You are listening and watching this time simultaneously 3 channels. Congratulations. It's an accomplishment. My name is Yuri Rashkin. I am host of Rashkin Report Perspectives, and I'm thrilled to be joined, as I am every week, by Jonathan Fink of Silicon Curtain. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Yes, just reeling from all the news and stuff. But we'll be diving into that in a minute.
Yes, and I'm also super excited to be joined by Jonathan Pearce as well. So we have a three-way conversation here, gentlemen.
Fantastic.
Of
Thank you for
Ukraine,
inviting me on.
And Jonathan here is a terrible reprobate, but he is pro-Ukraine, so I tolerate his company.
How jolly kind of you.
Well, gentlemen, it seems like the talk of the day in Ukraine, and perhaps not only, is the 28-point peace plan / capitulation proposal put together in Kremlin. I mean, in Miami by Witkov and Dmitriev. And it seems like our president is up to his old tricks. He was planning on trying to pressure Ukraine to capitulate. He still is. Anybody surprised?
No, but I'll jump in there because I know Jonathan's going to have a lot of stuff to say on this. I mean, I went online and I saw a quote from Michael McFaul, former US ambassador, and he is shocked. He's shocked that such a thing would happen. And whenever, and you're getting the impression in the media that they're billing it as new and it's peace and it's a plan. Well, it's neither new, nor is it a plan, nor does it represent peace in any way. And anyone who's shocked and surprised has not been paying attention. And this makes me angry, really angry now, especially when so-called experts, diplomats, commentators, journalists have the memory of goldfish and the moral capacity of teaspoons.
But is it important to be, is it relevant to have an outrage about something that seems obvious? Maybe there's a good thing to it. We can say, I cannot believe you still are not doing what you should be doing, but you never did. And you know, or should we just be like, I knew you were going to do it. Here you are doing it again, and it's not going to work again.
It's not going to work again. It depends how Europe reacts. And, you know, I've got a conversation queued up for tomorrow, which is let's use the crisis. So we're going to turn to Ukraine as well. Let's use these crises and not let them go to waste. Use the crisis to help reform potentially Ukrainian governance to a government of national unity. Use Trump's highly predictable move to put pressure on the Europeans to finally hand over the remaining 240 billion euros of central bank assets, finally invest in their defense, finally invest in pushing back Russian hybrid war, finally invest in smashing the Russian economy. I mean, if anything good's going to come out of it, let's make sure this acts as a reminder for the disingenuous, immoral nature of the US and why Ukraine and Europe stand or fall together. Jonathan, over to you.
Well, I'm wondering whether it was entirely predictable. I mean, in one sense, yeah, we're not surprised, but actually, I am surprised. Actually, I have outrage, as Yuri was talking about outrage. My outrage is because this deal is the worst deal yet. So you would expect, as the longer this went on, and the more Trump seems to be getting used to Ukraine, like Zelensky's back on side to some degree. It's not February 2025 in the White House where he was ambushed. There's been this improvement of relationships, and Europe has been working much more closely with Trump, you know, increasingly. And then suddenly, out of the blue, we've got this 28-point peace plan that's been worked on by the US and Russia behind closed doors. Steve Witkoff has seemingly given permission to go to town on it with, according to some, Trump's blessing. So it's not like this has been done without Trump. Apparently this is, yeah, and it wouldn't surprise, Trump doesn't care for Ukraine. We know that, but there does seem to be a big step backwards here. And I think that's what's triggering my outrage. It's just, this is the worst deal yet by quite a significant margin as well. And it's like they've learned nothing of the last 3.5, 4 years.
I'd agree with you in that it makes sense if you look at Moscow rules. If you look at how Keir Giles describes how the Moscow negotiation process works, it never dilutes. It never dilutes, especially if they feel that their adversaries are weakened and vulnerable. And with the scandal going at the moment, you can see why this absolutely fits into the Moscow playbook or Moscow rules, as Keir Giles calls it. I think that the shock and surprise is why this is happening in the US administration, as you say, after things have apparently been learned. But I think that's to ignore one of the key problems here, and that is that those lessons were only learnt by one camp, and there are two warring camps inside the Trump regime. He's floating around really with no context, no real understanding, but his instincts, his transactional instincts, and they are vying for his attention. And we've seen the sort of pro-Ukraine, those the slightly more immunity to Russian narratives gaining the ascendancy over the last few months. Now, Witkoff has been excluded from meetings. He's announced he's departing. Rubio will lose the spine that he seemed to be slightly regrowing.
You mean Kellogg, not Witkoff?
Sorry, Witkoff's leaving. Yeah, Witkoff's leaving. No, Kellogg's leaving.
Kellogg.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused today. Kellogg's leaving. Witkoff is in the ascendancy. Kellogg was excluded from meetings. Rubio seemed to be growing a spine, but that's probably going to go into remission. It does seem that actually, if you look at it as a war between two camps, what we're seeing here is the pro-Moscow, the ones who are susceptible to manipulation by the Kremlin, are gaining ascendancy. And Trump is going to go with whoever he's spoken to. Trump's going to go with his instincts, which are transactional. And unfortunately, if the pro-Moscow camp is in the ascendancy, Trump will align with them because
here's an interesting possibility. Tell me what you think. I heard it from I think Michael Clark, who's a retired general, and I think provides interesting perspective. His take was that this is just Trump trying to zigzag out of this conflict and getting out of it. And the question is, who is he going to blame? And if Ukraine rejects this and Russia accepts this, then it looks like it's Ukraine that doesn't want peace here. And so it allows him to go, oh, I'm out of here, and it's Ukraine's fault.
This has been a theory previously, but just for point of fact, Michael Clark is an analyst. He's an academic. I don't think he was actually in the armed forces, but he's excellent. I do love him on Sky News. But yeah, I think we've seen this before, which is, produce something for Ukraine that they just can't accept. And then that's, as you say, that's an excuse to walk away. It's a stick with which to beat Ukraine. Whether Marco Rubio is a sensible man in a room, I don't know. He said a somewhat cryptic statement on Twitter that could be read to be a slightly more balanced view, but it didn't really, it was a bit vague, to be perfectly honest. It's just, I can't believe Steve Witkoff, who Trump admitted knew nothing about the context when he appointed him. He's just a good guy. I felt he's the right guy for it. He's a guy who's a real estate mogul that has no interest, nor expertise, nor experience in anything to do with what he's doing. Thrown in to talk to people like Kirill Dmitriev and Putin himself one-on-one. No one to take notes for him, has a Kremlin translator provided by the FSB. This is a rank amateur, and he's the guy that's supposedly deciding the future of the entire nation of Ukraine.
But this is what's happening in the United States now, because we have a list of amateurs running departments.
Yeah.
It's not that he has no context either. Let's remember that Witkoff has been immersed, I would say, in a sort of Russian ethnic bubble, because he does have a Russian background. I don't believe he speaks Russian, but I think he will have been exposed in this, or he would have festered in this sort of warm bath of Russian narratives through his life. So he's not a blank slate coming in. He is already hardwired to be receptive, I think, to some of the, Kremlin BS.
Yeah. Nothing I disagree with there. He does have a background. His I think grandparents on the paternal side, I think, were from was it Belarus? But Soviet Union anyway. But yeah,
I mean, no offense to Yuri, because Yuri has a Russian background here, but I'm not saying you would have naturally stewed in the juices of Kremlin BS. But there are certain people who
I think that when it comes to Witkoff, I look at him as just another person who, due to his evidently strong sense of loyalty to Trump, is trusted to go and do important things, and also because of his golf game, I guess. It's a golf partner, and so when he goes to meet with Dmitriev, everybody knows, no matter if it's Rubio or Kellogg or name a person, it doesn't matter what they say, because Trump is the one making the decision, and it's about proximity to him and about his priorities. And his priority has always been to have a good relationship with Russia and Putin, and that has never changed. He just keeps we think like, oh, he finally got it. We understand Gopniks, they understand GOP, they understand strength, and they'll get it. It's like one constant Prigozhin scenario after another, where he like steps back and then he tries to stab him in the back. This is just Trump again and again. He has, whether it's his compromat, which I think is losing steam, that idea, because so much have spilled out with Epstein case. Clearly, Trump just has no shame. So that really is just not a weak spot for him. But it's the business opportunities that Russia is promising, the riches, the enrichment that is just driving him over Ukraine, which is like a bone in their throat.
Question for you, Yuri, being based in the US, talked about or referenced this idea that Ukraine are in this weak position on the battlefield, arguably, and politically with regard to the corruption scandal. Do you think so? The theory is that Russia have been pushing hard on this right now because they sense this is the right opportunity and they could maximize their gains. Do you think that also applies to the US with the Epstein scandal now becoming really quite explosive, and some people optimistically thinking it could be the end of Trump, or certainly it's a downhill trajectory from now? Do you think Russia were sort of understanding that this is a weakness for the US and it could be the right time to try and make sure that this gets pushed through the US because they're concentrating on other things, they don't have the bandwidth?
It is possible, but I think Trump was always in support of every plan that Kremlin has had. And it seems to me that he's such a terminal optimist, Trump, that he thinks that it's all going to work out and it's going to be fine because he's been amazingly lucky so far. Why would that ever change? But it is a scandal, although he seems to have put it a little bit on a back burner because now he signed the document or the bill. So now it's going to be 30-day clock until the documents are not produced for whatever reason, and we can deal with that at that point. So I think this is more about Zelensky, and it seems like there's a double, like a fork pointed at Zelensky, because on one hand, there is the peace plan, but peace plan coming in at the time when Zelensky is under corruption scandal. And also there's a possibility I'm hearing of U.S. possibly even launching an investigation against Zelensky. And I think that this is an attack on Zelensky to walk away and to get rid of him, which is another desire of Kremlin. So I feel like this is really just Trump using whatever moment he thinks he has. And he's not thinking so much about how this is the Epstein scandal. He's not even really thinking, maybe he's thinking about his life expectancy, because he discusses heaven and heaven's on his mind, a lot. But, it appears that he is no longer really worried about election prospects because he's a lame duck pretty much certifiably now. So he's going to just declare, that this is all military war, he's in charge, or he's not going to run for re-election because either way he's out. But I think that the air is such, the wind is changing, I think, a little bit in Ukraine right now. And my impression from speaking to like Roman Cymbaluk and others is that people are going to support Zelensky no matter what, because even in peacetime, they would get rid of him just like that. But it's not peacetime, and people understand that. And so there's just going to be pressure on him to reform, but there's not going to be pressure on him from the people so much, it seems like, to step down.
That's precisely, well, my take on that. And I think Zelensky is enough. I mean, when push comes to shove, I think he'll think, it's my nation and the fact that I'm here at the top tree in power, or I choose my friends and confidence, which is going to be a difficult choice for him. Actually, let's not trivialize it. But ultimately, he's going to choose power and the country over Yermak. Yermak will go if the evidence mounts. And there's now a lot of pressure. There's the kind of pressure we saw building that led to the protests in the summer, that really reminded the government that actually they are ultimately accountable to the people, even in wartime, even when elections are suspended. They are still accountable to the people for their power. So I think this, the phrase I used, make use of a crisis, don't let a crisis go to waste. I think we're going to see some dramatic change. Ukraine is far more resilient, far more realistic, and less divided than either the US or Moscow think they are. And to Jonathan's point there, we know there's a lot of problems on the front, but again, I think Putin may be delusional in thinking that Ukraine has its back to the wall militarily. Russia is as fragile, if not more fragile on that score, I would argue, than Ukraine is. The price is absolutely catastrophic and terrible that Ukrainians are paying. But when they get drone operations right, we're seeing ratios of 10 to 1, 16 to 1, even 32 to 1, which is what Robert Magyar Borovdi has been claiming for some of the operations he's been involved in. And now you're seeing many veterans who've lost limbs, etc. They cannot go back to the trenches, but they are going into these drone units. And one of them was describing, that when he was in a trench over 4 years, he's sure he killed 3 Russians, but he's not really sure if it was any more than that. That's 4 years of fighting. In his first month in the unmanned systems forces, he killed 16 that he could see and find evidence for. So Ukraine is stronger than we think, and far stronger perhaps than Putin believes. And Putin probably believes his own forces are far stronger in a more capable position for reasons we've discussed before with both of you, which is that he is not getting accurate information about what's going on. He is getting a laundered view from his commanders who do not want to fall out of windows or drink the wrong tea by giving him bad news. So we've got where we started, we've got a bad information loop that is informing both US and Russian decision making, and they're not in a strong position that they think they are.
I have a slightly different view. I don't think anyone's particularly strong. It's just a case of who's the less weak.
That's it. It's always been. Right back from the start of the war, it's been that case. Yeah.
I don't particularly talk in terms of victory for this war anymore. I talk about who is likely to lose the worst. And so,
Yes.
when Russia started up with the amount of troops and Ukraine started down here, and as they attrit, who's being attrited at the greater rate? And the problem is that Ukraine has a much smaller gap between 0 and where they have been. Russia has a much larger gap, but actually it's been brought down much more vociferously, hugely. And Ukraine are coming on board now. I mean, it seems quite late in the day, but the innovation is starting to hit the long distance missiles and drones. Really, that should have been like a year and a half ago. It would have been nice, but they're coming online now in a way that they aren't so much for the Russians. And there is hope in that innovation and scale. It's all about scale of troops, scale of equipment, scale of distance munitions and whatnot. And it's just a race. It's basically this kind of, I call it either a game of attrition chicken or pressure cookers. Whose lid blows off the pressure cooker first. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say there is
almost day one, I think. When Europe didn't really pile in and give Ukraine what it wanted, it's always been this battle of who's going to be least fragile.
But I think that when we look at Ben Hodges' attitude towards this, I think his look has always been it's about logistics. And I think that's where Russia is really struggling, because they can't even invade because they have no logistics to support an invasion.
And they're only 45 kilometers from where they started out, let's face it, near Donetsk city. I mean, there's a question, Jonathan, as well. Another delusion here is that 95% of the drones are not necessarily all the components sourced in Ukraine, but they are put together based on Ukrainian specifications, innovation. 95% of the drones, which one assumes correlates to 95% of the kills, 80% of kills and injuries are inflicted by drones. Therefore, and strategically, the impact on the Russian economy is not so much sanctions, it's Ukrainian long-range missiles, again, almost entirely now within their own control. The US seems to think they can put pressure on Ukraine to stop, and that pressure would lead to a significant military weakening. But America and American-provided systems are not responsible for the attrition of the Russian economy or for the battlefield kills that are being achieved. Ukraine is in control of these resources. It's only lacking money and finance and support from European partners. It could scale these up dramatically, even using its current.
But how much trust is there towards investing in Ukraine when you have corruption scandals? That's what I'm curious. Does that affect the desire?
I'm not sure
of people
that's
to
what's
invest?
holding it back. I'm not sure that's what's holding it back. Actually, in the defense military circles, people I've met, that's that's not really the thing that's holding it back. It's the lack of understanding and information by investors. It's the fact they're not on the ground. They don't understand how rapidly these things are evolving in Ukraine. It's a question of sort of distance, poor information, lack of imagination, and risk averseness. I'm not sure, actually, that corruption is the biggest thing holding that investment back, because there are now quite a few, Western governed vehicles for investment directly interfacing with the military-industrial complex there. So I don't think government corruption is a real problem at all. There's other issues.
I would say I don't think you really dismissed it, but you were bigging up how Ukraine is really hammering on their own kind of missile sanctions, but actually is such an important component in Ukraine's success. And in fact, I've long said back when Biden was in charge that Janet Yellen at the Treasury Department was one of the single most important people with regard to putting pressure on Russia. Like, the American sanctions are huge, and Trump comes along and finally, with his arm being twisted all which ways, he finally puts sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, and shit hits the fan. Yeah, you could have done that 10 months ago. And in fact, the Biden administration could have been harder. So I think those sanctions and EU
could have been done years ago.
Yeah,
could be done years ago.
EU's announced they're going to put more sanctions on, loophole evasion and shadow tankers and the people who operate shadow fleets and whatnot. But the UK, Canada, the EU, Japan, and the US coming together and going even harder. Like, if the US will just change course now and just properly went hard at Russia with sanctions, like to the hilt, then Russia would capitulate. I'm fairly sure about that. I don't know how quickly, but you see that the impact of just those two companies being sanctioned is huge.
I don't disagree at all. I question whether Russia would capitulate. But I don't question at all your logic there that it would place terminal pressure on the Russian economy. Absolutely would. Could have been done a lot sooner.
I don't know about that. I think it feels to me that since war is a political decision, and we see plenty of situations where Russia didn't start a war where it could have, or didn't stop a war where it could have.
Yes, I don't think it'll stop, but that's more Putin's weakness. That's more his intractability.
Then what are we talking about?
Lack of imagination.
Then what is the goal?
I think you drive the country into a form of economic collapse, where it becomes ungovernable and the war becomes unsustainable.
But as long as there's enough money for people with the sticks, then it's going to be okay.
But there won't be. I mean, there comes a point where there won't be. The Sovereign Wealth Fund doesn't even cover the budget deficit for this year, let alone the ballooning budget deficit we're going to see next year. Prices are inflating. The military-industrial complex is no longer pumping the economy up. It's in.
Well, we can never overestimate or underestimate the passivity of Russian populace.
Well, the problem is their model relies on liquidity to pay for recruits. So if they're going to sustain the war, I'm not saying they cannot sustain the war, but at some point next year, they're going to have to decide whether they change their recruitment model from financial incentives to pure terror and coercion. Now, I'm not saying they won't do that. In fact, given Putin's background and psychology, it's highly likely that they will. But he will be forced by this crisis to make decisions he doesn't want to face, and to ratchet up the terror.
Because I see a lot more concern about that in English language space than in Russian language space. In English language space, people go, he's running out of money. What is he going to do? In Russian language space, they're like, he'll figure it out.
So there's something to add to that, actually. So I think the Sovereign Wealth Fund has been absolutely hammered, and this is correct. But something that might be worth considering, this kind of goes against my point and maybe Jonathan's point as well, is that Russia, last count, has something like 2,333 tons of gold. And that is broadly the same as the amount of gold they had at the beginning of the war. So they haven't really dipped into their gold reserves too much, and the value of gold has gone up. And so there is a contingency that they can draw on, possibly, if they really go heavy on. Interestingly, that's the central bank, but other banks, like the private banks, in 2024 used up 46% of their gold reserves. So they're in trouble. And I think the banking sector in general in Russia is in trouble. And I think the economy is in massive trouble. There are loads of huge indicators. But as Yuri says, the the resilience of the Russian people is quite something, or the passivity.
Well,
it's not really resilience.
It's not really
tolerance. But gold. I wonder whether there's Russia has an ability at last chance saloon to just dip into huge amounts of gold.
Well,
I think
that's why I just think that
everything.
maybe the
Putin,
140 to 180 billion dollars in Europe is a much more practical goal.
Yeah. Oh, that needs to be.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that is the big thing at the moment. You've heard, I don't know if you heard in the last 24 hours, Russia's come out and said if they get that 140 from Euroclear to Ukraine, Russia will take Belgium to court. So and Belgium's already wanting the EU to, rightfully so, to underwrite the risk. But the battle, that honestly, I think that's one of the single most important components of this war right now and going forward. That money needs to get to Ukraine.
And it's for European defense as well, because we see in the sabotage attacks in Poland, again, people are endlessly shocked and surprised when they really shouldn't be. But we see a definite escalatory track on the hybrid war against Europe. When the media talk about peace, and again, we talked about this, Jonathan, over and over, they need to deconstruct it. Peace is not peace when there's no justice. There's no justice in this 2028 plan. There's no answer to Russian hybrid attacks. If, in fact, the US was to either wash its hands of this or impose some kind of deal, I would see the aggression against Europe actually ratcheting up, because then America would say, well, we've done our bit, or we've washed our hands. This is now fully your problem, fully your problem. There is also a rumor going around. This is from a Finnish commentator, but I think it is very much in the rumor mill. But behind the scenes, he said the US is saying if Europe doesn't align to this peace deal, then American troops will be pulled in their entirety from Europe. Now, that at the moment is pure speculation. It may even just be a provocation.
They were going to do that anyway. That's Project 2025.
It's part of the long-term plan anyway, so it's not a huge surprise if indeed that turns out to be.
Hasn't it always been going in this direction of there being this point at this decision for Europe, whether they stand up, and by Europe, I mean Europe plus, UK, Norway, and even you can include Canada here, whether, at the moment, no one's got the guts to stand up directly to Trump, because everyone's afraid of Trump being retributive and then starting or furthering the trade war by putting up tariffs. You say, right, screw you, Trump. I'm going to stand up and do what everyone knows is the right thing to do.
Yes.
But no one does it. Everyone is still polishing Trump's boots. And I've explained this before. It is obvious why this is happening, because otherwise you throw your country onto the brink of a recession, because the US goes into a direct trade war with you. So everyone's like, oh, lovely Trump, be nice. Oh, Trump's our daddy and all this kind of stuff. And I understand why that's happening. But are we moving closer and closer to this breaking point but everyone has to do it together, like where and the EU would, but then you've got, of course, Hungary and Slovakia and blah, blah,
I think
blah.
if people had our level of decisiveness, we would have been at that point long time ago. But every time I look at European leaders, I'm amazed at how much they can bend over backwards a little bit more and retain this feeling, impression that we're still together, even though we really are not. I mean,
this is it. And what are we waiting for is the big question. No,
we understand why they do that. Well, Yuri, we understand why they do that, though, because if they don't, then he'll whack another 25% tariffs on them.
So why would they stop?
Well, no, they keep going now because at the moment,
I think what they're hoping for is that we're in the United States are going to solve this problem electorally. We're going to get rid of this, the situation, and that's, I think, what Europe is waiting for. Like,
what do you mean the next
for Trump? Now Europe is waiting for end of Trump.
Oh, right, yeah. But yeah, possibly, I mean, but that's a long time to wait, and Ukraine doesn't have that time.
Well, Trump may have his wings clipped. This is one ready for Yuri, but I know, Jonathan, you follow this really closely. It seems that there will be a Supreme Court ruling coming up within the next few weeks that may overturn Trump's tariff policies, may prevent him from imposing further tariffs and annul that whole thing. At that point, he loses a key tool to threaten Europe. So there are some interesting movements that may happen. Then we've got the midterms next year, which will then mire the remainder of Trump's presidency in various suits and commissions and all research into his general venality and corruption. So we may be seeing, and if you listen to Scaramucci and a few others, you may be seeing Trump Trump entering a lame duck period, which means his threats and
Yep,
coercion
I
against
fully agree.
Europe
He's in that period.
don't really have the strength that they did before.
I think that with Trump, we're seeing signs of weakness, and the problem is that we don't really have a mechanism to get him out before his term is up. And when it comes to foreign policy, we have little mechanism to control him. So on some level, he's going to be trying to push Ukraine to surrender to Russia as long as he's in the White House.
Yeah.
Now, there's a possibility that he might be out of there next week because, the scandals here are pretty big and powerful, and who knows? And every time he meets a journalist, it's a badge of honor to ask him about Epstein and see how he loses his stack this time, and he's 79 years old. So who knows? But we just are lacking certain mechanisms right now, and I think that needs to be acknowledged.
I think there's a really simple calculation as well to throw in here, Yuri, and that is that supporting Ukraine in a war for the US is, as Trump sees it, a net cost. Stopping the war, this is why he wants a quick end to the war. He doesn't care about whether it's just or even lasting. A quick end to the war would expedite trade deals with Russia. And this is what he keeps talking about. And Russia know this. And Russia mentioned it again in the last couple of days, saying, we want to kill Dmitriev. I think we want to get back to US Russia ties and relationships. So he looks at this and says, right, given that the tariff and trade wars that have been taking place. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. So given that actually the American economy is in a bit of a bind and his stats on the economy at the moment are tanking, like really tanking. There's some new stats out from the AP poll and Fox News poll, and he's in trouble, right, on the economy with the general public. One way out of that is getting some inward investment or getting money coming in from Russia through blah, 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 blah. So I think it is a case of show me the money. So I think, like, if that is still going to be the calculation, then he is just going to support a quick end to the war at the expense of Ukraine and for the benefit of Russia, because it's for, as he would see it, an economic benefit for the US.
And this is really dangerous then for Europe, because whatever provocations Russia engages in after that, he will have a built-in incentive not to intervene, not to inflame tensions. And there'll be this, dare I say it, sort of Damocles hanging over him from Russia, which is, okay, well, if you put them on that, then we'll pull the deal. Oh, if you object to Narva being invaded, if you object to these sort of, the river borders being moved, if you object to the internet backbone being severed, and blah and blah and blah, and it goes on and on. So these trade deals are not just, objectionable morally. They would represent a serious weakening of European security, comparable perhaps to when Germany tied the continent to cheap Russian gas.
All true, although it seems like Saudi Arabia is now, has a lot of control over our economy, and so maybe it's Saudi Arabia that's running the show. What I would like to understand from you people there in Europe is, when I try to figure out why Trump hasn't ditched Ukraine entirely yet, I feel like part of the reason is because he looks at Ukraine kind of like Taiwan, where it's a signal of what's going to happen after that. And do Europeans really hold Trump to certain accountability for how he handles Ukraine in terms of, well, I don't know, trusting him with their own security, but is it a part of Trump's calculations that if I totally let Ukraine go, Europe is not gonna, I don't know, Europe's gonna bail?
No. My theory is this. Sorry if I answer this one, Jonathan. My theory is this: there are two competing worldviews in the Trump administration. In the American political landscape, I think a wider understanding. So one worldview is Project 2025, which is isolationist, don't give a toss about Ukraine, Europe's war, very much like the Charles Lindbergh America First policy in the 1930s. That's what's happening now. And actually everything that Trump really wants to do aligns to that. But what is competing against that, and I think this is whoever wrote the True Social post when he was at the UN Council, the General Assembly meeting, when he just changed on Ukraine and said Ukraine can win this, blah, blah, blah. Totally different to anything he'd ever said before. I think that's someone coming from either the Department of Defense or the kind of old school Republican and Democrat world of America in this globalist internationalist scenario being this big power, and you have the intelligence services and the armed forces before purges have taken place, like believing that. And I think those two worldviews are often competing, and Trump is often having to fight off his own kind of entities in the whole political landscape. And this is why you see him oscillate, and this is why you see the foreign policy oscillate completely between one position and another, is because you have two utterly different worldviews existing in the same space. And the European worldview would cohere more with the traditional kind of Biden era positioning, which I think is what the establishment military believe as well. And that's why the Saka, the person in charge of NATO at the moment, Grinkovich in Europe, is giving Ukraine permission to fire missiles unilaterally. Like, that's happening. That's the old school kind of understanding. Then you got Project 2025, and Trump really is Project 2025. But he sometimes has to do what he's told by, or what he's convinced by the last person that speaks to him. And if that's someone from this worldview or from Europe or from NATO, then he swings over to the other side. And it's just like that and that. That's my view.
Jonathan? I mean, to me,
Yes.
to me, I will say quickly that to me it seems, I respectfully disagree, because I don't feel that people from that old world view, that the Reagan Republicans, have much of a pull anymore in this administration. There's like Marco Rubio, who's trying to pretend like he is one of them, but he's really like almost an adult. But that's about it.
But it's not so much the people in the administration, it's the people in the Department of Defense. It's like the civil service structure. It's
Pentagon and
like,
Defense.
It's the Pentagon, it's Defense, it's CIA, it's FBI, before they were kind of
And
purged.
it has nothing to do with our reputation with Europeans.
No, I just think there are fights going on, and I think, you know, there are. You saw what happened when Pete Hegseth called all the commanders to that meeting, and a lot of them were. I mean, it was just, you get a sense that the establishment, military establishment, don't like the direction of travel of the Trump administration, Project 2025. And by the way, you can throw in loads of lawmakers as well. So although we can forget people in the Trump administration, but actually, you generally, Republican and Democrat representatives and senators are for Ukraine and for that international outlook. And it's just the MAGA Project 2025 bunch who are trying to purge that out of places like the Department of Defense, the FBI, and CIA. But it's a fight. It's a kind of, it's,
You know,
it's a really
around
big fight.
the brain of MAGA, it's Tucker Carlson, which is Kremlin.
Yeah.
So really, MAGA is a Kremlin movement that Trump has to pacify.
100%.
That's right. Yeah, QAnon slash Kremlin amenable movement. And we won't even get into Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, no,
but that's an
it's Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, it's Heritage Foundation. Yeah,
it is really the Heritage. So once you understand the Heritage Foundation being the authors, well, being the think tank behind Project 2025, and you understand that Tucker Carlson is part of CPAC, which is affiliated with which is the Heritage Foundation, and Tucker Carlson's interviewed Viktor Orban. Tucker Carlson's father sits on the board of directors for the lobbying company that lobbies for Viktor Orban. The connection: Tucker Carlson's interviewed Viktor Orban. He's been, you know, there's been CPAC in America where Viktor Orban's been twice, I think. CPAC's been in Budapest. You've got, which is a conservative conference for people who don't know, and Viktor Orban was invited to Mar-a-Lago on a red carpet. All of that is the world. That's the kind of world I'm saying is the Trump administration or the White House. And then you've got all the rest of the establishment that's kind of like uneasy with that.
And MAGA is more like the kind of attack dogs. They don't necessarily align fully with Project 2025 or even fully aware of it. But it's, and if you listen to Scaramucci, it's interesting. He says, like, does anyone actually like and respect Trump? He says you won't really find anyone who does it. And the few people who might have, like Taylor Greene, who are the fanatics, are now being ostracized by him and his sort of, you know, backsliding on their agenda. Universally loathed, I think, is his view. But he's also feared, which is why people have moved against him. And I'm guessing they're suppressing, or some are really not expressing, you know, what they would like to see on Ukraine. And it's the way they suppress it for domestic issues. They fear Trump because he's been powerful. He was powerful even when he lost the election, was out of office, powerful in the first one. He has this mob. Oh, poor little Trump. He has this mob that can destroy people, who can, you know, you turn against him and you get, you know, vast amounts of death threats. But when, like Putin, and this is very comparable here, when he is no longer able to project fear, when he loses that control, of course, it's going to be disaster. Because what do you have in place? Well, you have an orange puke-filled sack with none of the power to fear, only the power to give you the icks when you look at him physically. And this is probably coming in a way that it wouldn't in the Russian system, but the US system seems to still have some at least checks and balances, which mean that at some point Trump will no longer be considered useful or be able to provide that fear/protection for people who comply with him.
It's both of those things. It is both fear and people use him. Like someone like Stephen Miller doesn't fear him. Stephen Miller uses. I mean, my opinion is the Trump administration essentially is the policies of people like Stephen Miller and Russ Vought, these kind of Project 2025 people. Trump is vacuous. Trump doesn't really have much of a foreign policy agenda. I don't think he's knowledgeable enough on nearly any of the subjects upon which he makes decisions. He's not knowledgeable enough, and so actually he's just this mouthpiece that's being driven by people behind him. And you ask him
that why Stephen Miller may be one of the most powerful people in the White House right now, according to people around from news articles that I've read.
100%,
that he is the best at pandering. Because that's the only time Trump stops speaking is when he's being told how amazing he is and what a genius he is. And apparently nobody's better at that than Stephen Miller.
But of course, many of them are just there for the sycophancy and proximity to power. It seems that Stephen Miller has not only a near borderline psychopathic loathing of so many people and things, including much of his own country, he also has a plan. I think that's the problem here. He is a man with a plan. Well, let's turn to Europeans. I mean, Europe. Again,
here's my question. I think it's a great question we have here from our listener. It says, funniest part of it is U.S. security guarantees. Really, I've been laughing about this joke for a long time, but Ukrainians keep wanting those. Like, what does that mean?
There is no guarantee. I don't know if they believe there's a guarantee. I mean, I honestly don't. I've never spoken to a Ukrainian who seriously believes a guarantee. They've been here before. Even the UK, that they consider to be a staunch ally, they understand that UK was neither in a position nor had the will to be able to help support, after the Budapest memorandum, etc. We made promises. We wrote checks that we couldn't cash. And that's where you have a well-meaning partner in the UK. They know that the US is neither of those things at this point in this administration. I don't think any of them believe there are any real security guarantees. I don't think many Ukrainians now believe that NATO is a security guarantee either. They see it the way I've come to see it, as something of it may be useful if you get subsets of NATO members to act in coalitions of the willing, but as a broad bureaucratic organization, I don't think there's any real guarantee of anything there, especially given the US stance. So this doesn't really explain Europe's behavior. I mean, it's not just out of fear of Trump that we are kowtowing and failing to do what's necessary. I think there's a deeper malaise there, which is, and I've spoken to many people, and I say, do European politicians really understand the problem? And they say, yes, they actually do. They actually understand the toxic threat. But it's money, it's a managerial attitude, it's lack of imagination, lack of willpower, lack of the ability to talk honestly to their electorates because of fragile domestic political issues. I think there's a multiplicity of issues which ladder up to dithering and hesitation, even when you're aware of the issue. And I'm assured that European politicians do understand the toxicity that Russia now represents.
They do. And the issue is the nations within Europe or within the EU that are within the sphere of influence of Russia, and that's also in countries like Germany, like the AfD. What was it recently? I've yet to talk about this on one of my videos, but someone was looking at the official website for the AfD in one of the regions, and the email address of one of the contacts was a Russian.ru email address.
Yes.
And you're like, what? So literally you're contacting the AfD and you're speaking, you're sending an email
to the Kremlin. Yes.
Yeah. So
the Kremlin is busy invading its neighbors right now. We'll get back to you.
Please leave a message. Ha ha ha.
those are the deep challenges. I think, serious amounts of money having to be spent when domestic politics is screaming out for more investment, and people are, UK, we're absolutely, penniless at the moment type thing, compared to where we'd like to be. But I could just go back to the NATO thing. What frustrates me is NATO is the cheapest, best way to get security guarantees. And what annoys me is if you had an American administration that were up for this, then everyone else would kind of follow suit. Maybe Hungary would have to be arm twisted, but the idea that we're going to have to spend billions of pounds or dollars or euros to get our troops into Western Ukraine and to put a no-fly zone and to provide this and to provide that, this is an insanely expensive logistical nightmare. Or we spend nothing, literally virtually nothing, and just say on a piece of paper Ukraine can join NATO, right? Ukraine then join NATO, our security guarantees are £0, and it's just Article 5. If you attack Ukraine again, you've got all of us to deal with. It's the cheapest, most effective. No one has attacked a NATO nation, so it is the most effective. I mean, we can slag off NATO all we like, but is on form.
I'm sorry, is blowing up a railroad in Poland, does that count?
Oh, so this is where we get into fascinating discussions about. So I love this kind of discussion. You can almost get a little bit philosophical here, talk about the Socrates paradox. But the point is that Russia are amazing at just pushing the envelope. When is war? When is activity? When does it reach a threshold of war? Information warfare, a hybrid warfare, the grey zone warfare and stuff. And at the moment, Russia are just going, you don't have the guts, you don't have the guts. And they're going to shine lasers in our pilots' eyes. They're going to blow up railway tracks. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And until my opinion is that any kind of activity like that, we draw a red line now. We say to Russia, if there's any more activity like this, we will put a no-fly zone in Ukraine. Like, we need to put red lines back to Russia. We always imagine these red lines for ourselves. We need to take it back to Russia. We say anything like this, we will do this. You've done that, we're going to do this.
Sink the Yantar, oh, whoops, it entered our sovereign space, or it did something nefarious. Oh dear.
No, but you warn them. You warn them. You don't just sink it. You just say, honestly, mate, if you do that again, we are going to do X, Y, Z, whatever the thing is.
Then you follow through. Then you actually sink it if they don't comply.
At what point are we going to take over the Shadow Fleet then? Because that would be one point of leverage that could be shown that this is not invasion of anything, but it's really messing up with Russia's money. But of course, maybe Russia's money is the most important thing, and that's why Belgium is the most important country in the world.
Yeah, it should have happened already. And guarantees should have been provided to Belgium right at the start of this process when pressure was put on them. It almost suggests to me that unfortunately some countries are using this as a fig leaf because they know what Belgium is going to say. They've known from the start what guarantees would have to be put in place. So it is disingenuous to embark on this process without considering those as a core part of the process. Similarly, I rather fear that there are countries that are jumping up and down about Ukraine accession to NATO and privately, not NATO, to the EU rather, that are privately rather pleased or relieved that we have Fico and Orban who are able to throw a spanner in the works because they don't have to look like the bad guys.
Yeah, I would just get really hard on the Shadow Fleet. They started doing this. Finland did this. France did this a bit. We need to just board every single Shadow Fleet vessel that passes through our waters and then hit it for environmental and health and safety regulation infringements and just impound them and say, right, it's not because you're Russian. It's not because, blah, blah, blah. It's because actually you're environmentally a bit of a disaster waiting to happen. So we're going to impound.
Well, that is Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah, Russian. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I should remind everyone to immediately hit like and subscribe to all three channels if you haven't done it yet. I also exist on Substack in English, so if you're a Substacker, Substack me. But I think that this is one of our best views, and I think just great to have these discussions here where we have such different perspectives pulling in together. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, thanks to you to Silicon Curtain. Yeah. But this is
So I knew you'd get on with Jonathan. He's not such a bad egg after all, you know, when you get to know
I
him.
like his hat.
I wanted to ask you a question there, Yuri, because you said earlier that there aren't that many Russian voices who are saying that these economic pressures are actually causing issues. Of course, it depends who you listen to. I mean, might go to our Michael Naki and Vladimir Milov, and both of those have been saying for some time that actually the economic situation is worse than many are painting it. Now, there may be an inbuilt bias into certain parts of the I won't even call them opposition, because they're not going for office. I would say they're good, strong voices, not the sort of classic liberal Russian imperialist opposition. Is there an inbuilt bias here? Same with Michael Fagan, to overtalk the fragility in the Russian economy, and is it perhaps dangerous to put too much store on that?
I think that the answer is really in your question, which is they've been saying it for some time. And I think that highlights the suspicious accuracy of their predictions, because there is, you know, I think that all of them do have their own agenda, which is not necessarily agenda that I even disagree with. It's just they have, you know, and I think that Michael Naki is, even though he says that he's not trying to put a positive spin on things, but, you know, it's good to acknowledge that Russia is struggling. He also is acknowledging that that doesn't necessarily mean Russia will collapse or stop the war. But yes, it is happening. For Milov, I think that he's got a certain amount of credibility outside of Russia and inside Russia, and he could potentially be a high-ranking official should Russia ever decide that they wanted to change things for a couple of years and go in the democratic, you know, to avoid starvation. Milov could be a fantastic solution, kind of in between, from one KGB officer to another KGB officer in the middle. Milov, but
He'd be the bologna and the KGB sandwich, you know.
And yet he's a very smart person. I enjoy listening to him. I just, you know, anybody who has hopes for Russia, I go, are you looking to run for office there? What's the story? And I think there's other people besides them, like in Russian language space, there's a gentleman named Lipsitz, who's Lipsitz. I can't remember quite his last name, but because I always see him and I always go, how is he getting more views than I do? But he specializes in Russian economy, and he explains every time how it's getting bad and worse, and everyone's like, oh, I want to see him. Okay, I mean, that's great, but I think that Russia can collapse and continue to have a war at the same time.
It's the quantum empire, you know.
I think
both alive and dead.
Yeah, it's Schrodinger's empire. Yeah. So I think that's exactly right. And again, it goes down to this kind of resilience, or whatever you want to call it, passivity, which is the economy can completely collapse, and hospitals and schools are totally underfunded, and it's all falling apart. But anyone that wants to protest about that, well, you'll end up in a gulag, and in fact, most already have at the beginning of the war, have fled the country, and so therefore there isn't this kind of.
And the irony of it is that you're going to get arrested, sent to gulag, and from gulag you'll be sent to Ukraine, where you'll be killed.
Yeah. And so you can understand why they don't want to protest. Now, this is slightly changing the subject, but I was just reading while you guys were chatting there, not that I wasn't listening to you, of course, that we were talking about NATO earlier, and this is coming from the Times. The US would like Germany to take over the command of NATO forces in Europe, according to Matthew Whitaker, which is very interesting, because many people argue that the US should definitely be remaining in Europe as you know, for their own strategic benefit and have a hand in it, etc., etc. In remarks that elicited shock from German NATO.
Ignorance of history to ask Germany to be in charge of European security. Is this? I mean, like, am I missing something here?
Ouch.
Well, in normal times, I wouldn't say this is actually such a bad thing. But when you're on the threshold of AfD gaining charge, do you want Germany leading NATO with an AfD government? I mean, that to me is the absolute defenestration of European defense. So one has to ask, is this being done by design? Is this, you know, if I'm putting my super cynical hat on, let's have
Elon Musk's wet dream.
It is. This is exactly it. You have an extreme,
on so many levels,
extreme right-wing Kremlin laundering party that uses, you know, Kremlin.ru email addresses running NATO. The show is over. The show is over at that point.
I think what needs to happen, I think somebody in American politics, obviously it's not going to happen under Trump, but needs to get up and go onto national TV and say, a bit like what Macron did a year and a half ago or so, when he spoke to two journalists in Paris and explained, exactly why we're doing what we're doing and why it's really important to support Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. Somebody needs to explain to the American people why it's really important for America and for really their economy that America is militarily involved in the security of Europe. Like Europe's security and stability, economic stability is America's security and stability. And America gets a return on investment. Perrin did a really good video on this at the beginning of the war, saying, I know lots of people are complaining that lots of Americans are complaining they spend much more on their defense than other nations as a percentage of GDP, and it's all very asymmetrical. But the idea is that actually, if the US kind of controls NATO, then they use it to forward their own foreign diplomatic strategies, and they get a return on investment. They get trade deals with these places where they have bases all around the world. This is about the projection of hard and soft power, and NATO does that. It's exporting security. And if
Jonathan, I disagree, because I think, and I'll be brief, because I think that you're saying US should be interested in maintaining control of NATO because it will have control of NATO. And I'm saying that the Trump administration is looking to shift responsibility for fail to anybody else. And so if they look at NATO,
Yeah, no, but there's two things I'm talking more about, not even particularly with regard to Ukraine, actually, just in terms of why the US, is doing all these things, is involved in Europe, is involved here, and actually it's because they get to dictate, what they want, and they reap the rewards for doing so. I mean,
you're promoting the world order that doesn't exist under this administration. They closed USAID because they don't believe what you say.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying, yeah, exactly. So they are going down this isolationist route, which is antithetical to this projecting, and you could call it American imperialism, but it depends. What are your goals? So most Americans would say, we want to be the best. We want to stand up and go, USA, USA. But you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say USA, 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 and say we're the best at everything, and at the same time completely go insular and say we're not going to get involved over here. We'll leave that to you. We'll leave that
Soviet to me, say we're the best country in the world and close the border.
Yeah. But the reality is that China and Russia and whoever else in the EU will step into that power vacuum. And then if you're talking about global geopolitics and strategizing kind of on macro scales, then that isolationism will only, I think, make the US economically and in terms of raw power weaker. And I just think that when you hear people go, why are we spending money out here? We should be spending it on ourselves. They don't understand that spending money out there gets a return on investment. So they have more money back here to spend on themselves, except they don't spend it on welfare. But that's another question, so I think why the US does stuff has not been explained adequately to its own population. So they don't understand why they're projecting themselves out around the world. And many people look at that as US imperialism, and it is to a degree, but it's at the end of the day, it's about power and it's money. And your national interests are your economic interests, really.
The biggest hope is that the battle between TV and the refrigerator, which went one way in Russia, is going another way in the United States, because we saw on this last elections earlier this month that when people went, wait a minute, the prices are going up, this whole fascist bit is not working for me as well as I thought. They're looking at it as an economic theory to lower the price of eggs. I will try with a little fascism. Didn't work. All right, let's try a little socialism. Let's see if that lowers the price.
What are you talking about, Russia or the US here? I'm genuinely don't know. All right, yeah, because weird times we live in.
Indeed. Yeah, well, it's mechanism. Somebody wrote that we have a 25th Amendment, but I will say that with this cabinet of secretaries who will be less than nothing if they're not next to Trump, they could be in jail if they're not next to Trump. So why would they vote to get rid of him? It's entirely possible that at some point he'll just take off his pants, and they will be like, okay, we have to do something. But then they'll just, I don't think that even at that point, write in comments, do you think if President Trump depensed himself in public, would the 25th Amendment be functioning in the United States, or would his secretaries would just say, "Well, I guess that's the new fashion. Everybody, take off your pants."
So it comes down to, like, what do people want? And obviously, Trump is a vehicle for so many people. So as horrific as he is for many on the other side of the aisle, for many in the Republican Party, although he's going too far over here and he's doing wrong over here, he's still the vehicle with which they can just deliver anything. And they're doing it by executive order. He has signed more executive. If you see the graph of executive orders that Obama, Biden, and Trump 1.0 signed, it goes like this, right? And then Trump 2.0, it goes almost exponential. It is exponential upwards. So he has signed something like, I don't know, 400 executive orders. What this means is part of what the Project 2025 called the Unified Executive Theory, which is trying to distill power into the executive, which is the White House, and away from Congress and away from the judiciary, and kind of get them under him. Then you're looking like having a dictatorship. But then if you have that, then if Trump is broadly doing what you want him to do, that means you can just railroad your agenda. And so, people are happy with a mental Trump who is losing his faculties, still running the show, because he can deliver for them what they want.
He is a vehicle, and I feel like we should go on the ride as well.
Yeah, I mean, they're not even that competent at the economy. They're not.
I'm riding that vehicle.
They're not competent at prosecuting their enemies. The case against the former Comey, that's fallen down because they're just too incompetent even to try and persecute their enemies. So this is, we've been talking a long time about Trump's authoritarian slide, but it comes back to it being a clown coup. He's just so incompetent at everything
that's
he does.
Where I think about Russia, because on one level, Putin has made a huge number of mistakes. On the other hand, so what?
But there's no accountability there. Historically, there's no accountability or check on ludicrous, whimsical, and capricious decisions made by Russian autocrats and tyrants. There's never been a system of checks and balances. In fact, the entire system is built on compliance to power. The US traditionally is not built that way. So it leads me to think that if you have an incompetent would-be autocrat, at some point their sheer incompetence is going to come up against some checks and balances and go, do you know what? You haven't filed the illegal paperwork properly. Sorry, but maybe I'm being too optimistic there.
Trump is behaving like Stalin did during the start of Operation Barbarossa. Yes, don't tell Trump that he's just like Stalin. He'll be too happy.
But I mean, look, he is. I've done several videos on how seriously, like from a technical point of view, this is what fascism means. Here are a couple of scholars who talk about, the tenets of fascism, whether it be Jason Stanley or whoever else, and this is the direction of travel the US is going on. Here's the data point. Here's the data point. Here's the data point. Here's the data point. And it is very clear that, in my opinion, but with evidence, that the United States is embracing fascism, actual fascism. Now, people get annoyed because they think fascism, you have to be dressed in a brown shirt and you have to actually be German and you have to have a leader that has a moustache or something like that. But actually, no, modern fascism is going to look different. American fascism is going to look different. And it is looking more and more like the United States is moving that direction. So just to finish this off, like when you've got MBS, where Mohammed bin Salman being welcomed into the White House as someone that was supposedly behind the 9/11 and supposedly greenlit the murdering of an American journalist who was dismembered using a chainsaw, and Trump defends the man that greenlit that, an American citizen. So you have the family of an American citizen hoping, well, let's see if this guy gets his comeuppance. Let's see if Trump gives him a hard time, like he gave Zelensky a hard time in February, like he gave the South African president a hard time over white genocide, right? No. Mohammed bin Salman, they're like fist bumping. They're saying, "Oh, how wonderful do you think I am? Do you think I'm the best president that ever was?" And it was obsequious and it was horrible and it was distasteful. And it was Trump being a dictator next to another functional dictator, in my opinion. And he just wants to be the dictator. We all have brown shirts. It's called the ice. Yeah, I mean, honestly, Trump, if you gave him a choice whether you could be a dictator tomorrow or not, he would snap your hands off. He wants to be that dictator. He said, and the last thing I'll say is that hot mic, which he then said subsequently in an interview, he was speaking to Steve Doocy, I think it was, on an airplane, and he was caught saying, is King Jong-un going to come and what is he going to come and visit you? Are you going to visit King Jong-un or something like that? And Trump answered, I like Kim. I wish, or something like that. And he said, I wish my people would stand up straight like they do when he speaks. In other words, I want my American electorates to be like the put upon people of North Korea. And it's like, if that doesn't tell you that he wants to be a dictator, I don't know what will. Anyway,
He really was just born into the wrong country.
He could snap his fingers and Jimmy Kimmel would disappear from the air and South Park would get taken down. He'd love that
Park
world.
is delightful. I just watched the last one this morning, and it is so on the nose, and it is so deeply inappropriate, and it is so brilliant.
Supposedly it makes Trump nervous.
What, South Park?
What happened in South Park in this episode?
Really?
Yeah,
do you reckon do you reckon someone's actually shown that to him? Because it is pretty explicit of him having sex with JD Vance on the bed, and then it's about AI, and then he claims it's just fake AI. And but he keeps and what they're doing, they're so clever. What they're doing is like, please cancel us, please, like, we're having you have sex with JD Vance, and then you're going to be kissing, and then you're going to be kissing again, and then we got mood music, and then it is that on the nose, and they're just saying, come on, cancel us, because we want a censorship cancel culture war with you. Satan's baby, you got to watch South Park if you don't know what that means.
As long as these voices are here, I think all is not lost. I also like John Oliver and his quote about Epstein, where even the guy running the Pervert Express to Crime Island thinks that you're a dick. Well, as long as that stuff's still being broadcast, there is some hope at least.
Well, Epstein said, I'm the only guy that can bring down Trump, and then subsequently dies. So there you go.
Well, sounds like we'll have something more to discuss next time.
It certainly does. Yuri, thank you so much.
Epstein's not going away.
Oh, no, that's Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you so much. My name is Yuri Rashkin. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Subscribe to all the channels that you see here, and we'll come back soon and have another video. And if you want to know, you'll be there as well. So see you soon. Slava Ukraini.
Slava.